They're the people you thought you knew and the people you want to know more about. The all-new Biography Channel. Step out of your life and into the lives of movie stars and moguls. From their most dramatic on-screen performances to the untold drama of their lives.
Every night, you could live another life.
Movies, biographies, and documentaries 24 hours a day. The Biography Channel. Call your cable operator or satellite provider.
Changes have come quickly to Saudi Arabia. Its oil brought America its highest standard of living, but 15 of its citizens produced the greatest tragedy in American history. And now Saudi Arabia finds itself the target of terrorists and bombing. In this special report, we gain unusual access to this mysterious culture to better understand our complicated ally. In the wake of the war in Iraq, the United States needs to understand Saudi Arabia as never before. The Saudi government agreed and granted us permission to travel across the Arabian continent, to visit wherever we liked, talk to whomever we chose. We went to the mosques and the markets, to schools and shopping malls, to family gatherings and government institutions. We talked with members of the royal family and those who hold the country's future in their hands, with women and desert people. We found that to understand Saudi Arabia, you must first understand its religion. What is the solution, and how do you achieve peace?
The solution, they go to they should follow Islam, because Islam is the right religion.
One other issue united this kingdom, that U.S. policy regarding Palestine is unfair, a position that's deeply felt in Saudi Arabia and just as deeply opposed by much of the Western world. Over the next 2 hours, we'll journey across this desert kingdom to try and understand the roots of their suspicion and anger, and why a love-hate relationship might be tilting in the wrong direction. Our journey begins with an invitation to pray. 5 times a day, Islam calls its followers to the mosques. 5 times a day, the people answer. And for 20 minutes, the land is washed over in the silence of worship. In Saudi Arabia, the institutions of government and religion commingle until they are virtually one. By law, all businesses must shut down during times of prayer. And Saudi Arabia's religious police are there to make sure those laws are obeyed. They are known as the Matawa and operate as an arm of the ruling religious ulema. With their walking sticks and long beards, the Matawa have become more aggressive in recent years.
When you live in a 14th century society, you don't really need mutawas too much because there's not that much trouble that people can get into.
Vernon Casson has lived and worked as an attorney in Saudi Arabia for more than 20 years.
When you have satellite TV that shows soft porn in the evenings, society can react to that, and the mutawas are a way some of the more conservative elements of the society react to that.
In Saudi Arabia, there are many different types of mosques. Each houses an imam or pastor with his own unique interpretation of the Quran. Many of the sermons are political, demonizing Israel, attacking Western imperialism, and even critiquing the royal family itself.
من التهم التي تلصق بدين الإسلام أنه
Sahal Laden Yassin is a leading cleric in Jeddah and one favored by the royal family.
لا يصح أن يكون نظاما للحياة يشمل العالم كله. والجزاء من جنس العمل.
He believes that the rift in relations between America and the Muslim world can be traced not to the Iraq War, but to the conflict in Palestine.
The hate that is growing up inside the hearts of the Muslims is towards mainly the American government, because we think as Muslims that the American government is not treating the Palestinians and the Israelis fairly enough. When they think of Palestine, they know that these people share our race, share our belief, share our religion, and we should defend them. We should put ourselves in their shoes. Do we like it that somebody come to us and occupy our land and asking us to leave without any justifiable reason? I wouldn't accept it for myself.
Prince Abdullah bin Faisal bin Turkey is a grandson of King Abdul Aziz and a rising star in the next generation of Saudi leaders. He spins religion into yet another political context. As a weapon used by Osama bin Laden on September 11th to split Saudi Arabia from the United States. In the Saudi kingdom, it is popularly known as the wedge theory.
We feel those people who participated in the hijackings were kids that were misled, brainwashed, and were intentionally recruited among Saudis who were in Afghanistan to make a point in damaging relations between the Christian world and the Muslim world.
Drive a wedge, too, between the United States and Saudi Arabia?
It was meant to be, otherwise why would they go out of their way to pick people from a society that had no terrorism before or violence?
Such is the power of Islam in this land. Its towering presence inspiring millions, while also casting deep shadows. The roots of Islam can be traced back to one man, the holiest of Muslim prophets. A man who walked these hills in the 7th century, a man named Muhammad. Sharif Bassioni is an Islamic scholar at DePaul University.
Here you had a man who was a very pious, who was a very honest, straightforward man. He was very responsible. He led the merchant caravans of a very rich widow whom he later married, and he would retire to meditate. And one day he came back and he said, I had this revelation. Am I mad? Am I crazy? Is this the devil? What is it?
The angel Gabriel had appeared to Muhammad and instructed him to return to Mecca, to preach of the one true God, Allah. Centuries later, millions of Muslims honor Muhammad by making a pilgrimage to Mecca each spring, a journey known as the Hajj. Along the way, the pilgrims might pay a visit to Mecca's sister city, Medina. It was here in 627 AD that Muhammad, with the help of Allah, defeated an enemy laying siege to the city. According to the Quran, during that battle, known as the Battle of the Trenches, a tribe of Jewish allies betrayed Muhammad, sowing the seeds for an enmity between Arab and Jew that still lingers today.
The Jewish gave their support to the enemies of the Prophet Muhammad. Instead of helping him out, they opposed him. So the reaction of the Prophet Muhammad, when he finished fighting with the enemies, he came back to the Jewish, he asked them to leave because he thought that they do not deserve to live in this place because they have broken down the peace agreement.
There's no doubt that this initial transformation with the Battle of the Trenches and the betrayal, then sort of was carried in the history that followed as being that basically the Jews are untrustworthy. A lot of anti-Jewishness has developed out of it. And I think that this has remained sort of dormant for generations, but it has been awakened by the conflict in Palestine.
1,400 years after his death, the lessons of Muhammad's life, persevering through hardship, trusting in Allah, fighting to protect Islam, and keeping at a distance those who cannot be trusted, are practiced by Muslims across this desert kingdom. Like Muhammad himself, the lessons are powerful, capable of many different interpretations, inspiring some to the noblest of purposes, and twisting the hearts of others to commit the worst sorts of evil.
We were shocked that people hijacked our faith, the faith of 1.3 billion people in the world, so easily, made it look as if they were the spokesman for that faith. And then what shocked us more is that on the other side, they were extremists who took advantage of the shock and the bad feeling after the attacks to attack all of these societies and all of the adherents to that faith.
Underpinning that shock, the realization that the events of September 11th placed in jeopardy the engine that drives this desert kingdom. It's oil, over 260 billion barrels worth. Why do we care about a kingdom halfway across the world, and in many ways light years removed from the West? The answer is simple: oil. An ocean of it under a carpet of desert sand. The fuel that for the last half-century has powered the world's economy and shaped our global political landscape. A new regime in Iraq, unfettered by the embargoes against Iraq under Saddam, brings a new player into the oil equation. How the world decides to exploit its vast resources could cost Saudi Arabia billions of dollars should Iraqi oil suddenly come flooding into the market. Charles Lipsome is a professor of international politics at the University of Chicago.
The Saudis are well aware that Iraq is a potentially large source of hydrocarbons and potentially a competitor to the great Saudi oil fields. The real point there is not just that there'll be more oil on the market, but that there'll be another really large player with large reserves.
Iraq is but the latest example of the link between oil, politics, and power, and underscores the domino effect events in one desert kingdom can have on its neighbors. It is a nexus the Saudis are acutely aware of. For the better part of the last 30 years, they have enjoyed an uninterrupted run as favored trading partner with the West, holding more than 260 billion barrels of oil in reserve, and providing more than 26% of the world's total supply. The largest consumer by far, the United States.
Saudi Arabia is not only the big producer, it's the big source of surplus. And what that means is that when you run short, they have excess capacity that they can use to fill up a tight market.
With American assistance, Saudi Arabia has developed the world's most sophisticated and reliable system for delivering oil, and adopted a pricing system designed to keep world markets on an even keel. The Saudis' fervent, if not yet achieved, goal: remove the political dimension from oil. Make it strictly business, with the Saudis acting as the largest seller in a seller's market. Patrick Clausen is Director of Research at the Washington Institute.
They want to make sure that oil remains a major energy source for hundreds of years. They don't want to see oil be regarded as such politically volatile source of energy that we have to do everything we can to shift to non-oil burning cars, to have sources of electricity like nuclear power that don't use oil and gas. So the Saudis made a business decision to make oil something that's reliable, stable.
It is hard to imagine, but true. The vast oil reserves upon which the entire world now depends were once nearly abandoned as unproductive. The year was 1933. FDR was in the White House, and a young man named Adolf Hitler was coming to power in Germany. In the Middle East, Saudi King Abdul Aziz faced an empty treasury and a corresponding need for cash. Standard Oil offered Aziz a deal: $170,000 in gold and a penny per gallon on any oil found over the next 60 years. Some people thought the Americans fools with their money. Those people were wrong. In 1938, well number 7, still known as the Prosperity Well, hit a gusher. In the aftermath of World War II, other nations circled the find like hawks. But America was about to secure its interest. From the Yalta Summit in 1945, FDR flew directly to a meeting with Saudi King Abdul Aziz. He brought gifts and money, and the two men came to an understanding. Shortly thereafter, thousands of former GIs traded their uniforms for high-paying jobs in the desert. Their mission? Harvest oil out of the sand.
Well, what this is...
Charles Freeman is the former ambassador to Saudi Arabia.
Why is Saudi Arabia unique? It's unique because it's the only piece of land on earth that was never penetrated by Western missionaries, armies, or merchants. It's the only place on earth where the West arrived not as conquerors or as teachers, but as hired help.
In the 50s, Americans turned deserts into ball fields, held 4th of July parades and boat races along the beach. For a few decades, the money was good, the oil flowed, and everyone was happy. In 1973, however, global politics mixed together with the business of oil and forever changed the calculus of power. In October of that year, Egyptian and Syrian tanks poured across the Israeli border. When the West, and particularly America, came to the aid of Israel, Saudi Arabia led an Arab oil embargo. The effects on the West were devastating. Oil prices jumped from $3 a barrel to $16 and continued to rise. In 1979, when the Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew the Shah of Iran, prices spiked again to $54 a barrel. Eventually, Saudi Arabia stabilized prices, and the markets returned to normal. The precedent, however, was set and has never really changed. Those who control the flow of oil, in essence, hold the Western world hostage, both politically and economically.
The whole world runs on hydrocarbons, and it has for 100 years. For the last 50 years, the main source of the world's hydrocarbons has been the Persian Gulf. And the biggest source of all of that is Saudi Arabia.
The ocean of oil under the Saudi Arabian desert has reaped this kingdom enormous profits. Since 1980 alone, more than $1 trillion from the West. Raising the question, what did the Saudis do with all that money? The answer? They made cities out of the sand. In the town of Yanbu, along the Red Sea, Saudi Arabia's past lives quietly in the shadow of its future. Only 25 years ago, this village had neither a telephone nor a gas station. In the ancient marketplaces, men still gather to share a hookah and trade local gossip. Here, along the banks of the Red Sea, boat building hasn't changed since the time of Muhammad. But just a few miles across the harbor, we can fast forward some 2,000 years. This is the new Yanbu, an industrial city designed to bring electricity and water into the desert and allow modern cities to take root and flourish.
When I arrived in Saudi Arabia in 1980, the whole country just was beginning its construction of infrastructure. I mean, there were, in the areas now that you see that are very built up with modern buildings, I think there was only one stoplight in the whole area.
In the 1970s, Saudi Arabia spent over $100 billion to retool its kingdom. Yanbu and its sister city on the Persian Gulf, Jubail, were the centerpiece of this effort. The project became one of the biggest and most ambitious ever undertaken, with American engineers and know-how playing a leading role.
We brought a lot of American professionals and engineers in those two industrial areas. We had to bring huge numbers of them who came and hit the ground running, and great work was done by all.
The Bechtel Corporation in San Francisco is one of the largest construction companies in the world and was a major presence in Saudi Arabia throughout the 1970s. Chairman Emeritus Steve Bechtel recalls his father, Steve Sr., used to dream about the great challenge of Saudi Arabia.
Dad and some of our guys were doing some dreaming about Saudi Arabia and thinking about ways we could be helpful over there, and utilizing the natural resources within Saudi rather than either flaring the gas or shipping the oil out mostly as crude.
Seeing Saudi Arabia's desert as a blank page, Bechtel came up with a plan to build cities out of sand. First, they linked oil fields in the desert to seaports along the Persian Gulf and Red Sea. Then they built refineries and gas processing plants at Yanbu and Jubail, tied together by a 1,000-mile pipeline across the desert. These were used to run electrical power grids providing light for the kingdom, and a string of desalination plants, converting salt water from the oceans along both coasts into drinking water that would irrigate the desert, and producing over 600 million gallons of water a day, 70% of Saudi Arabia's total water supply.
I think the manpower during the construction peaked out around 50,000 people. We had 39 different nationalities on the job. We had to try to accommodate their different tastes, their cultures, the food, and it was a pretty major operation just taking care of everybody.
Before it was finished, Bechtel would supervise the moving of 340 million cubic meters of soil, enough to fill the Panama Canal 10 times over. With unlimited water, oil, electricity, and gas flowing into its cities, this desert kingdom was forever transformed.
We were very fortunate that we broke ground in '77, and by '82 we were exporting petrochemicals, which was quite a record. And we were very lucky that the projects succeeded commercially, financially, operationally, and what is more important is managerially with the largest companies in the world. So it was a happy experience.
Coming together at the dawn of the computer age, Saudi's development plan enjoyed another advantage. All of the pipelines, connecting joints, storage tanks, and routing hubs were fitted with computer sensors, allowing huge industrial plants to be operated by a handful of employees. Khalid Rawaf came to Jubail to help build the new infrastructure.
For example, we have one of the ethylene plants that cost something like $850 million. It's run by about 90 people, and it's run around the clock. So those 90 people, you find only 12 or 15 of them on each shift.
The building of a kingdom in the desert was done with Saudi money, but Western technology and manpower. The royal family, however, foresaw the day that the Westerners would leave and Saudi personnel would pick up the slack.
Nearly every one of our people had a counterpart. It was a Saudi. Our job was to give them experience, let them participate. We ran a training center for them up there where we trained craftsmen, we helped with the technical training, we helped with the management training in more formal ways.
So the groundwork was laid. With the infrastructure in place, the Saudis began a major program to expand universities, construct major highways, and build out their city centers. But bringing in Western technology also meant bringing in Western ways and challenges to a centuries-old lifestyle.
I think it's like a lot of societies where when it modernizes, when you can have air conditioning, when you have electricity, when you have TV, people move into the cities and they take advantage of those shiny new things that they like. I mean, there certainly is a Bedouin life out there. I mean, 2 years ago, I crossed the big desert in the north by camel with Bedouins. It took 8 days, slept on the ground next to the camels, but the young people certainly don't want to live that kind of life. They want to come into the cities. They want to enjoy nice places to eat and cool air in the summer. It's rapidly disappearing.
In just 50 years, Saudi Arabia went from a country with 90% of its people living in the desert to 90% living in the cities. Today, Riyadh boasts a population of 4 million, Jeddah 2.5 million.
Because of the way we were catapulted into the modern world after 1,000 years of being outside its development, we arrived without parachutes, with baggage, some good, some bad. One of the good things is the importance of family life, importance of being close to each other and helping each other, family values. Obviously, there is a clash between modern economics and a lot of our customs and traditions. It is quite a struggle to try to do modern, efficient economic systems and yet keep these things that are dear to us.
For many, that conflict between Western values and the ancient dictates of Islam lies at the heart of the recent strain in relations with the West. The man who has stepped in to exploit that breach, Osama bin Laden. We pay a visit to the playgrounds where Osama grew up. One reason we came to Saudi Arabia was to learn more about this man, Osama bin Laden. Some would argue that he is the most dangerous figure to find his way onto the world stage since Hitler. And that, if not stopped, bin Laden will provide the opening acts to World War III. All this from a man whose childhood never hinted at the evil that was one day to flourish. This is Kandahar, an old section of Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, where Osama bin Laden grew up. The 17th son of Mohammed bin Laden, a Yemeni dock porter who rose from nothing to start one of the largest construction companies in the kingdom. Khalid Al-Minya is chief editor of the Arab News.
The bin Laden family is an old Jeddah family, and they're good people. They could be at home in any country club in Los Angeles or be watching a golf game in Atlanta. They're ordinary folks.
By the time Osama was born in 1957, Mohammed bin Laden was a man to be reckoned with. His bin Laden group had built palaces for the king, major highways and office towers across the growing Arab kingdom. Osama attended grade school here at Al-Thagra Model School, where his half-brothers taunted him with the name son of slave because his mother, Mohammed's 10th wife, was said to be of slave origins. When he turned 17, bin Laden's family sent him to the exclusive Brumana High School in Beirut. Osama quickly discovered the famed Beirut nightlife and was on the road to becoming another in a generation of rich young Saudi playboys, smoking, drinking, and frequenting nightclubs, where he is reported to have had a preference for blondes. When civil war erupted in Lebanon, the family yanked bin Laden back to Jeddah, where he enrolled at Abdul Aziz University. It was here that a half-brother suggested they take a pilgrimage to Mecca. It was a life-changing experience. Bin Laden sold his Mercedes, renounced his former friends, and began frequenting the mosques. When Russia invaded Afghanistan in 1979, Osama was among the first to sign up for a holy jihad. Using a Rolodex full of heavy hitters in Saudi society, bin Laden began funneling money, arms, and equipment to the Mujahideen, including millions of American dollars through the CIA. Abdulaziz Sugair is the president of the Advanced Electronics Company and was a high-ranking official in the Saudi Defense Ministry during the Afghan campaign.
Afghanistan, the fanaticism and the extremism that now we are attacking is to a large extent launched by the United States. Way back when in Afghanistan, when Russia was there, they encouraged religious fervor in Afghanistan, and they called it a religious war against atheists, the Soviets, the communists. So they did that, and of course you saw the seeds, and now they come back to haunt everybody.
When the Russians finally gave up on Afghanistan in 1989, Osama returned home a hero.
He was a hero in the sense that, he was one of the participants, I call them, in the struggle against the Soviets. But somehow or the other, there must have been something inside him that decided that he should do something more. Because they get restless. When you are on the battlefield for years, it's difficult to readjust to a normal life.
Osama's soldiers had tasted victory, defeated a superpower, and were eager for more.
When Afghanistan came to an end, there they were. They had nothing else to do. They were very militarized, and they had, a cause, and they were going to be real troublemakers.
In 1990, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and opened a door for bin Laden's warriors. Within hours of the invasion, Osama was on a private jet to Riyadh. He promised 10,000 men, fully armed, on the Iraqi border to protect Saudi Arabia. But the Saudis had a better offer, 500,000 troops from the United States and its Western allies. His offer rejected, Osama took to the streets and mosques to denounce the U.S., the royal family, and their unholy alliance.
He was asked to leave Saudi Arabia because he started criticizing the international coalition against Saddam Hussein's invasion. And he was being extremist. Later on, when it was discovered that he was making contact with well-known terrorists from around the area, his nationality was withdrawn.
Expulsion from his homeland made the break complete. Osama found refuge in the Sudan, then the caves of Tora Bora in Afghanistan. While the United States fired cruise missiles at shadows, bin Laden gathered his army in hiding, gained strength, trained, and waited. His first terrorist act on American soil came in 1993, the World Trade Center bombing. It was a shock that passed relatively quickly. After all, the attack was considered a failure. Then came September 11th, 2001. and the world came to understand just how dangerous Osama bin Laden could be. Not only did he create a brand of terror the likes of which the world had never seen, but he did it with a deep understanding of the potential political fallout.
Sustained.
Edward Walker is the director of the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C.
So if you can drive a wedge between Saudi family or Saudi Arabia and America, you can undercut that support, and that will make the Saudi family vulnerable. That's why he chose Saudis for his suicide mission. He could have chosen Pakistanis, he could have chosen Egyptians, he could have chosen half a dozen nationalities of people that were supporting in Al-Qaeda. He chose the predominant level of number of individuals as Saudis because he wanted us to react. He wanted there to be this division.
The Kandahar that Osama grew up in is a distant memory today. Most of the old homes torn down for urban renewal. The last time Osama was seen in Saudi Arabia was 1991. But his legacy, as well as his future, is a reality the Saudis must live with.
I think Osama bin Laden is more of a mixture of Charles Manson, John Gacy, Richard Dahmer combined, rolled and magnified by 15,000 times over. So he's not a product of the culture, just as serial killers or rapists or kidnappers of young girls these days in the States from their bedrooms are not part of the American culture. They are there. I don't think so he's a part of this culture. He is a part of this community, yes, but I don't think so the culture.
Anywhere you go in Saudi Arabia, Osama bin Laden is sure to be talked about. We were fortunate to attend a family reunion held at the retreat of a high-ranking Saudi official. There we relaxed a bit and then talked about another favorite topic, Saddam Hussein. The family reunion. In America, it might happen once a year, but here in Saudi Arabia, it happens every week. Just outside Riyadh, we were privileged to attend the get-together of one of Saudi's leading families, the Al Malik family. In a compound of more than 500,000 square feet, we met with Salah Al Malik, his cousins and brothers.
Okay.
We, Al Malik family, came from a village. When we were children, our village has only 500 people. And now it has 70,000 people.
There were, of course, some obvious signs we were not in America. The party was men only. Women were restricted to their own section. We sat on a carpet instead of lawn chairs. Instead of burgers and beer, there were dates and tea.
How long did you spend in the United States?
I spent about 7 years.
7 years there, so you know it well.
I know it very well.
It was a well-heeled party. Almost all of the men were not only professional, most boasted degrees from America's best.
There are so many PhDs here. You're Texas A&M, we had Texas A&M over here.
Then you could always go
CAU
around
in
and shoot.
Atlanta, Princeton,
Arizona State.
Arizona State.
As the night wore on, the Malik family let down their hair and began to loosen up a bit. In one corner of the party, we opened up a favorite topic back home, politics.
You know, I'm a banker, I am a PhD, I used to be a general. I can sit with anybody in the world because of my education in the United States. It's because of that. And now, with all this feeding by the Americans, I find myself disassociating myself with the Americans because of the Bush administration policy. I don't want this to happen. And the people...
In Saudi Arabia, Ahmed Al Malik is known as a heavy hitter, a former high official in the Saudi government.
No jobs, poor.
Like most Saudis, Ahmed believes Americans to be mostly misinformed, especially on the Palestine issue. He blames the American media.
You are watching CNN, and you are watching maybe CNBC, you are watching the BBC, you are watching Fox. But I wish you can watch a station like Al Jazeera.
What do you see there that we don't?
I don't think CNN or the other stations will show the details of the torturing of the Palestinians by the Israelis in CNN as it is shown in Al Jazeera.
In the comfortable setting of a family outing with his children playing soccer nearby, Ahmed Malik's tone grows more serious. Throughout the 1980s, he helped oversee monetary affairs for the Saudi kingdom and delivered many of the checks that helped bankroll the war machines behind, first Osama bin Laden and then Saddam Hussein. Now Malik says the United States and Saudi Arabia must bear joint responsibility for their creations.
I paid $30 billion loans to Iraq to help them not to lose the war with Iran. I was the central bank governor and I used to pay it. Every other day, the vice president of that country comes and we pay him $1 billion, $1.5 billion, $500 million, and so on. So it's Saudi Arabia and the United States that created the bin Laden in Afghanistan. Then it is United States and Saudi Arabia that helped Iraq to fight Iran.
But tell me, Bill...
After dinner, I walked the compound with Malik and his family. I was asked what Saudi Arabia could do to make themselves better understood by the West.
What do you think the Arabs, or Saudi Arabia in particular, should do to change the balance somewhere?
Well, the first thing to do is what you're doing right now, and that's opening up.
Saudi Arabia wants to show the world a new face, something beyond broken hills and empty desert, something that will attract tourists. For centuries, that meant the Hajj. Each year, the pilgrimage generated significant revenues for the House of Saud. Today, however, tourism has a different goal, not so much to raise money, but to raise awareness, deliver a political message, and counteract Osama's wedge.
This has been a closed society. America seems to know nothing about it, but you're trying to open that door. Why?
Well, we really have not been closed. I mean, maybe to the media. But we have 7.5 million foreigners here. We've had hundreds of thousands of Americans work here for a long time. We have fourth-generation Americans here in the oil areas. Recently, we were so shocked after the trauma that we also felt after the travesty that took place in New York in September of 2001. We felt we were misunderstood a lot in the public area in the United States, public opinion.
To help build a bridge of understanding to the West, the royal family has developed a new sort of Mecca for tourists. It is called Diriyah, site of the original House of Saud, and the place where the royal family finds its roots.
And my grandfather was the founder of the kingdom. And my uncles are kings and princes, but there was very little. We did not even have fresh milk.
Like so many other initiatives in this desert kingdom, the Saudis pattern their approach to tourism after America, exporting their image wherever possible through instantly recognizable symbols. Hence, this venue, still under construction in the northern part of the country. When completed, it will house a set of railroad cars and train station used by Lawrence of Arabia in a battle against the Germans during World War I. Nearby, we find a tiny wonder of the ancient world, Little Petra. Carved out of a rock by the Nabateans around 70 AD, a trading stop along the ancient Silk Road, and soon to be open to the public. In much the same way they built an empire in oil, the Saudis' image campaign is organized, calculated, and exquisitely crafted. Their goal, to solidify the kingdom's position as the dominant political and economic force in the region.
Saudi Arabia has had good relations with the most respectable governments and nations in the world, has had a positive contribution to world affairs on energy and finance. They don't like conflict, they don't want anything outside their country. All they want is to develop their country properly. There's a lot of work to be done, and we intend to do it and to be part of the modern world.
If the Saudis are to be part of the modern world, They need to bring the other half of their population with them, women who live their life under a veil. The second half of our journey through Saudi Arabia begins with perhaps the least understood segment of Saudi society. It's women. In public, they wear the black abaya and cover their faces with the veil. But their private appetite for fine clothing, cosmetics, and accessories drives the consumer culture. When McDonald's opens after prayer hour, they dutifully fall into a women's only line and take their food off to eat in what is euphemistically called a family section. Amina McLeod is an American professor, a Muslim, and a recent visitor to Saudi Arabia.
Well, the men are going to get served food first. Not because they're giving you the leftovers. That's not what's happening. But the men are going to get served first. And I mean, there's plenty of food for you and it will come.
Women cannot drive in Saudi Arabia. They will not preach from the pulpit, practice law, or hold jobs that require physical labor. Oppressed? By Western standards, many would say yes. Oppression, however, can be a matter of perspective.
The women would say, no, they're not oppressing us. They see themselves as keepers of a tradition. They see themselves as intelligent, very hardy women. Many of them quite thought that they were better than most Arab women because they demanded that their husbands do all the work and provide all of the money. Interestingly, while only every woman talked about the number of children she had, they did not talk about their interaction with those children.
Tradition aside, there is no denying the role of women in Saudi Arabia is changing rapidly. 5 years ago, there was virtually no place for women in the workplace. Today, they are the fastest growing segment of the job market. And while Islam demands that women wear the abaya in public, they are also snapping up plum positions in the fields of technology, finance, and advertising. Jihan Ramadan is online editor for the Arab News. In the overall context of women's rights, she views the requirement of the abaya as a bit of a red herring.
I personally find that there's not a great need for that to change before other changes occur. We have a need for changes in education, in more opportunities for women working in different fields, in educational opportunities in those fields. And I think those changes are much more important and much more crucial to look at than the actual wearing of the abaya.
Khalid Al-Minya is Jihan's boss. Almost 20% of his workforce is comprised of women, a trend he sees continuing.
The internet, which I think is the technology of freedom, ushered in a lot of opportunities for women. So you have webmasters or webmistresses, as you can call them, designers, advertising, public relation. These are all new fields in Saudi Arabia. And the majority of people coming into these fields are women or will be women in the next couple of years.
This year, more women than men will graduate from Saudi universities. In school, as in so many aspects of Saudi society, men and women are segregated. Saudi Arabia's own version of separate but equal.
You don't see any integration between men and women in one place. But they have equal opportunity and equal budget, equal for everything from the government.
At EFET, women study everything from medicine to psychology and computer science. Dr. Haifa Amal Al-Lail invited us to attend election day at the college, a rare invitation to our all-male crew. Our presence, I'm afraid, scared away many voters. Some, however, were willing to share their views on life underneath the veil. Safana Sajini is running for the Student Council. One of her reforms, transforming the abaya into a fashion statement.
Well, everyone is different, but the abaya doesn't have to be black or like it's a yaka abaya. Like it can have jeans on it, like things on it, like he can have fashion abaya. As long as you're covered, like, why not?
Lama Yunus is in her second year of study at EFIT. She is acutely aware of the opportunity and the challenge laid at the feet of her generation. The opportunity to receive an education, the challenge to succeed in what up until recently had been a workplace reserved exclusively for men.
Well, we have a lot of doctors coming from abroad, and they expected us to like be in deserts and, you know, like live in tents or something, because when they came, they loved the shopping over here, and they loved like the girls over here, and they never expected like us to be talented and well educated. Saudi women can be something, because if you believe in yourself, you will be something. If you have spirits and hope, you will be something. And I believe that an educated woman covers it all.
While Saudi society slowly begins to accept women in the workplace, other areas of Saudi life show no signs of change. Dating is forbidden. Without cinemas or theaters, the young women flock to the malls, but keep to themselves. Tamara Batterjee is an honors student at EFIT.
If I say I don't date, everybody will say like, that's very weird. Although in our culture and our religion, it's not weird at all.
We put our religion a first step. Before we do anything in this world, we look at our religion. We have to. I mean, life, our religion is a part of our life.
Dr. Salwa Sheikh provides an example of how one woman can bridge two very different worlds. She works in the blood lab at the Saudi Aramco hospital in Dhahran. Her husband, Dr. Abdul Amir, works beside her. Both served a 6-year residency in the United States.
There is freedom for women. I mean, I go, I work, I do everything I want to do. I mean, there is a difference between a woman and a man. You know, they're not the same. They're made differently. It doesn't mean, in a sense, you know, it doesn't mean that I can't be a physician or I can't do a particular job.
During our internship,
Salwa's husband, Abdul, explains how the couple met.
I was actually planning to, ready to marry, so I was looking for a bride.
The first lucky break, they worked in a hospital, one of the few workplaces where couples are allowed to intermingle. The second break, Abdul had a female friend willing to act as a matchmaker.
We had a shared person, a third party in the middle, who was her friend and my friend too. She is a nurse, a Malaysian nurse. And one day she told me, how do you like this person? She pointed to her. I'd never talked to Salwa before. And I said, oh, she looks very nice.
According to Salwa, her future husband might have thought she was very nice, but he had a little trouble getting the words out.
You hide always the part where it was, the hard time for you. So I went and I asked him about taking pictures, and he said, okay. Next day, he had I asked him for 2 pictures. He had how many?
The whole slide.
The entire roll, he brought the entire roll, and he goes, can I have your parents' number? I want to propose. And I thought he was nuts, because, I mean, I never talked to him, this is the only time I talked to him, he wants to go and propose me.
Abdul Amir was, for lack of a better word, smitten. In accordance with Islamic custom, he asked Salwa's parents for permission to court their daughter.
I let my father talk to her father, and a few months later, actually 4 months later, we were married.
An arranged marriage. On the surface, yes. A real romance with all the ups and downs of any Western courtship, most assuredly.
Yes, come and see the graphs of the patient, please.
In a strange land with foreign customs, the one constant is people. Scratch the surface and discover that in many ways, they are just not all that different. In the case of a young woman who juggles the roles of wife, mother, and doctor, life is hectic and challenging, regardless of where you live or what you might believe.
It's not like women's movement or men's movement. If I'm going to fight for every single thing a man is doing, I also have responsibilities at home. You know, I'm actually overloading myself too.
From women under the veil to an American under the gun. A day with the president's point man in Saudi Arabia. Halfway into our journey, we had not found one Saudi who wasn't upset at U.S. policy. More disturbing, we found only one man trying to answer their complaints. The United States ambassador to Saudi Arabia. Bob Jordan was the personal counsel to George W. Bush and headed up his campaign finance committee. After the election, Jordan was content to return to his life as a corporate attorney in Texas. George W. had other ideas.
The president and I were friends, and after his election, we had talked about what I might do in his administration. I said to him, I'd be honored to serve, but I didn't want any symbolic position or honorary position. I said, if you've got some heavy lifting for me to do, I'd be honored to help you. And so he called my bluff.
Did he ever? Jordan arrived in Saudi Arabia less than a week after the United States started its bombing campaign in Afghanistan in October 2001. Suicide bombers were hitting Israel, and America was clamping down on immigration visas for anyone from a Middle East country. By the time stories of Arabs being harassed reached back home to Saudi Arabia, the ambassador was the only one left to put out the fires, as we found when we followed him over the course of a day.
Good morning, Your Highness. How are you? Nice seeing you. You know, Tom.
20th century.
Prince Abdullah heads the Saudi Investment Authority. Jordan's job, listen to the prince's concerns over tightened visa restrictions on students attending colleges in the United States.
Front. The good news is I think we're now in a position where we can clear visas much more rapidly, and I think we can recapture a lot of those students that we may have lost for this first semester of this fall.
I think it's not surprising there was this shock and trauma about the travesty that took place. But people should not allow a small group of evil human beings to disrupt important basics in relationships between people.
Just so that you know, I think...
But what sounds benign in the soft language of diplomacy has a harder edge on the street. Anger over Palestine is driving a movement against American products.
Let me ask you about a touchier issue, and that is the supposed boycott of American goods.
I don't know how extensive this has been. As friends, we all always have, could always have differences, but the basics have not changed. We must not let small things undermine the important long-term role that this relationship could be beneficial to our worlds.
Back at the embassy, the ambassador gets down to business on those visa delays.
We're still working on the clearances we got from Washington. We have a lot of students trying to get to the U.S., a lot of businessmen and all that. We're calling them to let them know that they can come in and get their visas, but we haven't gotten through to everybody yet.
What's happening when you call? What are you finding?
Many of them are having problems getting paperwork from their schools. They had to get updated paperwork.
There's a good reason for the ambassador's concern. He doesn't want ill treatment of Saudi students in America to affect contracts with U.S. companies in Saudi Arabia. Case in point, Lockheed Martin executives show up to celebrate getting a Saudi Air Force contract.
The Arabsat contract that you all have won is really significant.
My sense is they want our technology. They continue to want our technology. Clearly the association face-to-face ebbs and flows based on the political environment.
Next stop for the ambassador, the closest thing this kingdom has to a U.S. Congress. It is called the Majlis Ashura.
The Majlis Ashura isn't exactly a democratic institution, but it's intended to be representative in the sense that it represents various geographic areas of the country and various points of view, and the entire legislative agenda of the kingdom is actually handled through them.
We are meeting with the Foreign Affairs Committee. And while Ambassador Jordan wants to talk about America's anti-terrorism efforts, the committee can hardly wait to talk about comments they have heard in Congress and the U.S. media that they perceive as anti-Saudi.
What worries us here in Saudi Arabia, and I'm sure in the Arab and Muslim world, is that fighting terrorism should not be transformed or lets anybody transform it to fighting Islams or Muslims. And sadly, this is the perceptions of many people here in Saudi Arabia and the Muslim world.
Now you read what Pat Robertson have said about the Prophet Muhammad, and you see this is not really conducive for good relations.
It's inaccurate to assume that merely because we have certain people in the media or other supposedly responsible positions saying offensive things about Saudi Arabia and the United States, that all Americans believe that.
Muslim schools have been attacked as breeding grounds for terrorists, which can be nothing further than the truth. These terrorists, they are misguided, brainwashed, call them what you might. But I think they were recruited for one simple reason. They were used as an instrument to destroy the close ties between Saudi Arabia and the United States.
You go to the hinterland.
There it is again, the wedge theory. That Osama bin Laden chose Saudis to hijack the planes on 9/11, to drive a wedge between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia.
To do what you're doing right now.
But if there wasn't 9/11, there would be another wedge, the U.S. policy on Israel.
The Palestinian tragedy, not only it is a tragedy for the Arabs, it is a tragedy for the human race. It is a tragedy for the Jews. It's taking the home of some Palestinians and living in it. I don't think the good, decent Jewish people will accept that.
We're going to continue today and tomorrow and the next day until the president decides otherwise with the same policy toward Jerusalem that we've had up to this point. We're going to continue to engage on a very substantial level and work just as hard as we possibly can to bring peace to that part of the world. I want to thank you for receiving me here today.
Give it a pause in a hectic day. I ask about the encounter, something we have heard over and over.
They are upset. I think they do perceive a bias in our foreign policy. I think in some cases that perception is overstated, and I think they don't realize how hard we're working to achieve a just and balanced situation in the Middle East. But certainly every time they see a 1,000-pound bomb dropped on an apartment complex full of civilians in the middle of the night by the Israelis, they wonder why that could be and why we don't equate that with terrorism when we do equate suicide bombings with terrorism. The view of America and our policy rises and falls with the ebbs and flows of the Palestinian situation.
And so it goes, back and forth, as if Robert Jordan is holding his finger in a dike, hoping it won't give way. Before he can sleep on this day, he'll have to deal with one more visit. At the Riyadh airport, he greets the U.S. ambassador on counterterrorism, General Frank Taylor, who will provide some backup on the touchy subject of Muslim charities.
There are people within those organizations who have subverted the principles upon which they were built to use that money for purposes that they were not intended.
The Saudis are very generous in their charitable giving. And so when they have this much money in a situation where you don't really know the people you've hired, it's a recipe for disaster.
Since this interview, the Saudi government has told the U.S. it has found and blocked over $70 million of Saudi charitable dollars headed to terrorist groups. For the American ambassador in Saudi Arabia, the day has been a snapshot of one of the hottest diplomatic assignments in the service. For a Texan, Robert Jordan must feel like the last man at the Alamo.
Thank you all very much. I ran into the president a few months ago. I saw him in the White House, and he said, "Bob, are you having a good time?" And then he saw the look on my face, and then he said, "Well, I guess it must be an interesting experience." So that's really what it's been. It's been fascinating. Fun is probably not the word to use for it, but it's a huge responsibility.
From a man who has the president's ear to men of the desert, who count their gold in camels.
When you have 5, you survive. When you have 10, you're wealthy. When you have 20, you're a millionaire. Here out in the desert.
From Riyadh, we drive 250 miles east into a land where even time gives way to a blazing sun, a land where Bedouins find their souls. Our guide is Nasser al-Araq, a retired general in the Saudi National Guard. Our destination is Tawhila, a small settlement populated by a Bedouin tribe known as the Al-Murrah. We stopped for provisions at the last grocery store on the highway, and then turned off-road onto a track better suited for travel by camel. The tribe would like that. The camel means life in an environment where death can be only a few hours away under the withering sun. A camel herd is more than a hobby. It's a spiritual connection with their past.
My great-great-grandfather was a camel herder. And the Bedouin and the camels, they have a very special relationship. Sometime when you're out in the desert, nowhere, you get a sandstorm, and then you get lost. All you have to do is just back up and let the camels lead the way. When you have 5, you survive. When you have 10, you're wealthy. When you have 20, you're a millionaire. Here out in the desert.
The Saudis are desert people, and the Al-Murrah are highly respected for continuing the ancient ways. It is near dusk when we arrive to a scene straight out of Lawrence of Arabia. This is one tribe, one family. Only the male members, of course, big and small, who gather like this once a week. They are the Al-Araq, grandfathers and sons and grandsons. As they pray together, we observe the elemental building block of Saudi Arabia, from the royal family to the Al-Murrah. It was here, from this tribe, that Muhammad Abdul ibn Wahhab rose up in the 18th century to preach a return to the fundamental faith of Allah. The Al-Murrah believe in a modesty, humility, and piety that isn't afraid, when challenged, to use the sword to defend itself. Today, that brand of Islamic faith remains the official religion of Saudi Arabia, the bedrock of their life. After prayer, it's dinner. The meal is fruit, rice, and a lamb slaughtered on the spot and eaten traditional style. On a night such as this, my new Bedouin friends remind me, the first king of Saudi Arabia, Abdulaziz, sat around a campfire with tribal elders, perhaps drinking camel's milk like this, preparing for the next day's battle. One that would recapture the city of Riyadh and lead to a 25-year campaign to unite all the tribes of the peninsula into a single Saudi Arabia. With dawn comes the wonder of the desert. A quiet, natural quality that seems to demand a prayer of thanks. This is called the empty quarter, well named at this time of day. But as the sun heats up, the business of life unfolds. a herd of camels is driven to pasture. It may be only a tuft of grass sticking out of the sand. And inside the village of Tuhuila, humans are beginning to stir. In a few hours, the temperature will be 120 degrees. Desert people carve out niches of time for work at the beginning and end of each day. As the sun hesitates on the horizon, our hosts spread carpets across the desert floor for breakfast and tea and share their stories. Here the talk is also of Israel, but the rhetoric is harsher. The philosophy, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
Before, the Israeli was killing 20, 30, and we kill one. Now, we're getting even. When you have a human bomb, he will walk, he will hide, he will stop, he will go. You know, a human. It's very difficult to stop a human.
What does that say?
Breakfast over, my hosts offer a tour of the village. Our first stop, a school where boys are taught separately from the girls.
Asking him a second, what are you doing? We can't see from...
They will learn math, English, history, science, and most important to them, religion. At this early age, the method of teaching is also ancient, by memorizing passages from the Quran.
والجبال أوتادا وخلقناكم أزواجا.
Tuhuila means deep well. In generations past, it meant life itself, and that's why the Almara prospered here. Where conditions are so harsh, having water is like having gold, because to live in the desert means you can't make many mistakes. Showing their pride, my hosts take me to the most important spot in Tuhuila. Not the village mosque, but the old, deep village well.
God has said in the Quran that He created from water all living things. But we consider this well as a strategic reserve, just in case if anything happen in this world, you know, things will be cut off. Electricity will be cut off. We will never die. We will come, open it, bring our camel, send the rope down, and take water and drink.
It's a simple, really simple life.
Yes, and it's very healthy also. When you see Los Angeles, you see the smog on top of it. It's very difficult to live it. Now I've seen it, I'm seeing it in Riyadh. Every Thursday when I go there, I see the smog on top of Riyadh. And it's unhealthy to live in big cities.
It's hard to find in cities of skyscrapers and oil, but the source of the Saudi way of life comes from here, the desert. As Nasser explained, it's a life of Islam, a life of faith.
Islam is one. الإسلام طريقة واحدة. الإسلام طريقة واحدة. الإسلام.
Islam is one. There is only one Islam, and it teaches the right way of living, to follow in the footsteps of Muhammad. And we find in Islam happiness, joy, justice, you name it. All the good things we find in Islam.
Desert living is unforgiving if you don't live according to simple, natural laws, just like the conservative precepts of Islam. And what place does such faith have here on a Saturday night in downtown Riyadh? It's time to go cruising Saturday night in Riyadh. Could this be Saudi Arabia? It's a far cry from mosques and camels. It could be any town in the U.S. with teenagers exchanging cell phone numbers, with girls in passing cars, and if they're lucky, meeting in nearby malls. What seems like innocent fun, though, is troubling to many Saudi leaders. Not because there's anything wrong with these teenagers, but because there are so many of them. For the last decade, Saudi Arabia's population has been growing at a remarkable rate of 4% a year. The average woman has 6 children. And in the general population, over 60% are under the age of 25. Every boy and girl in Saudi Arabia is guaranteed a free education, from kindergarten through college. Huge state universities have sprung up in the cities to accommodate them. But now that they are graduating by the tens of thousands, the economy is slowing, and they face a new challenge: no jobs. It was not, however, always that way.
We are a young country in relative terms, and during the boom days of the early boom days of the oil in the middle 70s, of course, the income was substantial, and the country embarked on a major thrust of establishing and building infrastructure. And at that time, there weren't enough educated Saudis or trained Saudis that can actually respond, that can fill the jobs.
Which color is orange?
To fill the void, the Saudis opened their doors to a huge influx of foreign workers. Hiring began at a frantic pace. Food service, gardeners, truck drivers, jobs that many Saudis simply refused to fill. In the late 80s, the oil recession stopped economic growth cold. Hiring slowed across the board, but the Saudi population kept growing.
You have a whole generation of Saudis who didn't have to work and never wanted to learn how, and didn't learn how. And then you have a new generation which is being forced to work because the subsidies aren't there to sustain the lifestyle that their parents had, and they're finding it difficult.
To combat the problem, the Saudi government has instituted a number of new measures called Saudiization, essentially replacing foreign workers in the private sector with native talent.
That is a trend that is taking place throughout the society. You'll find more Saudis that are driving cabs now and so on. It's economic necessity is taking over, and that's why the educational system has to be adjusted to accommodate Saudi workers at levels or in types of jobs that they've never had to or wanted to engage in before.
Driving a taxi cab or sweeping a sidewalk, however, is not the type of job most Saudis had in mind.
Yeah, many people talk about stereotypes about young Saudis. They would tell you, for instance, a young Saudi is spoiled. His expectations as far as pay is very high. He wants to be highly paid. He probably wants to party all night and probably don't show up early morning on time as he should.
And what do the young people have to say about their future? We went to Saudi Arabia's version of Exeter, the King Faisal School in Riyadh, a private academy catering to Saudi Arabia's upper crust. We met with a selection of students to talk about the future, their expectations and concerns. We started with their thoughts on America.
I've been to America for a few years, and mostly the first thing when you say Islam, that first of all you think of strange people from strange land, of course. That's the basic stereotype.
They actually asked me, do you live in a tent? Do you have oil in your backyard? I mean, how can I come to your camp? How can I travel if I live in a tent?
The more you listen to these young men, the more you are impressed with their acute awareness of the global stage and the role their country plays on it.
And the day that we heard about 11th September, that so most of the Americans thought that we were happy and about what happened, and that's not true.
The first thought that came into our minds were, We hope they're not Arabs, because we know anything that happens would reflect on us. When we knew it was Osama bin Laden, we knew that there was going to be a media attack on our country, and that's exactly what happened.
What the media shows the American people is that Osama bin Laden and the Saudi society have the same thoughts, the same way of thinking, and they support the action. But that isn't what happened here. I mean,
eventually, the discussion turns from America and September 11th to America and the war in Iraq.
Like, I am Iraqi, and my father's Iraqi, and they shouldn't just kill some innocent people for something they don't have anything to do.
Saddam was saying that he's gonna hit our countries if the American government started fighting Iraq from our country, our lands, same as Qatar and Saudi Arabia. So we're in danger. Not the American people, we are in danger.
Although these young men talk with an intelligence that belies their youth, they are still teenage boys. As such, the talk eventually turned to their favorite topic, teenage girls.
There's a boys group and there's a girls group. Sometimes the boys look for girls, they give them numbers and they talk to each other on the phone. But it's something public, it's usually a private thing. But if you want to talk to a girl or something, you should use the internet usually. It's against our religion that to meet a girl without marry her or she's not your sister. It's against our customs and our religion, Islam. See, the people here, the people in America, they think our culture can't work in the new millennium. It's not true. We know the only difference between the old generation and our generations, we know more about the outside world than they do.
This is the future of Saudi Arabia. A generation that faces the challenge of preserving its religious roots and a lifestyle dating back more than 1,400 years in a world that changes almost daily. And the engine driving those changes? Many would say it goes by the name of Al Jazeera. It comes beaming down from a satellite and is called Al Jazeera, a 24-hour-a-day news channel that may be the most influential force in the Middle East today. Staffed by former BBC reporters, it is the CNN of the Arab world. Its graphics are cool. Its newscasters include women who blatantly don't wear the veil. And its credibility comes from two facts. Al Jazeera reporters have access to places Western journalists can't go, and it broadcasts in Arabic.
I think Saudis, like a lot of the Middle East, are addicted to the images they see on TV now. And Al Jazeera is a very important player.
Al Jazeera provides wall-to-wall coverage of the Palestine conflict. Its editorial point of view is pro-Palestinian. And while many Americans feel that is perhaps a distortion of reality, Arabs view Al Jazeera as an important counterweight to what they perceive as the pro-Israel bias of the Western media.
It is getting images that are shocking and that have never been seen by the Americans. It is inflammatory in many issues, it excites people and all, but I think the images that you get from Palestine and in the occupied territories are correct and accurate images.
Al Jazeera is the new player in the Middle East. It has put credible pictures to what were once only newspaper accounts. And it has thrown gasoline on the already blazing fire of Israel and Palestine. It seems so shocking because for 30 years there was very little television in the Saudi kingdom.
For a long period of time, Saudi Arabia had a big debate about whether to introduce television, even for the most banal things. And the only way television was introduced is because the original purpose of television was to have people read the Quran and call for the prayer.
Traditional clerics feared television's window to the outside world, and its ability to corrupt the Spartan lifestyle of true Muslim faith, as laid down in the Quran. The overall effect was to isolate Saudi Arabia from what the rest of the world deemed progress.
I remember when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, and people saw pictures of it in the Arab world. A lot of people in Saudi Arabia and even in Egypt says, no, this is impossible, this is a fake.
It's one small step for man.
There is nothing that says in the Holy Book that a man is going to fly in the air or that a man is going to land in the moon. And therefore it can't be. If God would have wanted this, it would have been explicitly written. Well, it happened.
Today, the Arab love affair with television is in full bloom. Along with Al Jazeera, Saudis are exposed to the rest of the world, not only news, but popular American TV shows. In effect, exporting U.S. culture directly into the homes of millions of Arabs each and every day.
I think there's 700,000 satellite television dishes in the kingdom. People in little villages have satellite dishes. They see the news, they see what's happening in other parts of the world. And that's been an enormous difference. And you combine that with the effect of the internet, you combine that with the effect of young people traveling, seeing the rest of the world. That has created just an enormous opening of society here.
The transforming power of television can be seen throughout the Saudi kingdom. From the shops and malls layered with Western culture, to women awakening to the possibility of a career outside the home, and young people eager to explore life beyond Saudi borders. The culture seems to be changing rapidly, but that impression is only half right. It is still an Islamic country, and Islam permeates every aspect of Saudi Arabian culture. It shapes the way they view the world. And while the West seeks favor with Saudi's royal family, there is another power, perhaps stronger, somewhere else.
The part that's not visible, which you should look at, is the people who go to these mosques. The thousands and thousands of people who go to these mosques, whose voice you don't hear, and who have no interest in currying the favors of the monarchy. To what extent do these people really believe in the monarchy? In my mind, it's very doubtful. The images in their minds are the images that we saw in the 60s and the 70s in Europe, of all of these monarchs wasting their money gambling in Europe and buying palaces and cavorting with women and all of that. That's what they remember.
فإذا كان صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وسلم
Men and women on the streets go to mosques 5 times a day, where clerics talk about politics. By and large, Saddam Hussein was seen by the rank and file as a strong man, but not a holy man. Thus, it is not Iraq that most threatens the ties between Saudi Arabia and the United States. It is Palestine. And this issue is not merely political, it comes from the heart of Islamic faith.
The injustice, the indignity that the Muslims of Palestine and the Arabs in general have to suffer is the sort of thing that is really simmering. And so there is great opportunities for the bin Ladens of this world. I mean, we're attached to bin Laden, but frankly, if he's gone, there could easily be another or many others.
Our journey to Saudi Arabia has taken us from the desert to the skyscraper, from mosques to malls, and amid the political talk and a changing culture, where truth is hard to find in the mix, all conversations agree on one thing. The United States must learn to understand an Islamic way of life.
I sometimes am reminded by the comparison to a recent presidential campaign. I think I I ought to write down on my hand, it's the policy, stupid. And I think we've got to find ways to make sure that our policy, while upholding critically important relationships like those with Israel, is also attuned to our national interest, which may include a relationship with about 1.3 billion Muslims around the world.
The end of the war in Iraq brought new problems for Saudi Arabia. Terrorism. A May 12th bombing in Riyadh was an attack from within. If Osama's wedge theory was intended to push the United States and Saudi Arabia apart, sharing terrorism could bring them together.